So the biggest threat to the early Byzantine Empire were the Sassanids. But as we saw earlier, the Arab Muslims are going to conquer the old Persian Empire, including the Sassanids. And so now the Byzantines faced a new threat in the Islamic world. And the Islamic world is going to gradually chip away at the Byzantine Empire, taking away Egypt and parts of North Africa and parts of the Fertile Crescent as well. And they even launched a series of sieges against the capital at Constantinople. And the only thing that really saved the Byzantine Empire was what they called Greek fire, which was kind of an early version of napalm. It was a mixture of sulfur and lime and petroleum that they used to completely devastate the Arab ships. Otherwise, the Byzantine Empire could have been taken early on by the Islamic world. Now, to oversee their empire, they're going to organize a theme system. And this theme system was part of their very elaborate bureaucracy, which is one of the things the Byzantine Empire was known for. And so under this theme system, different regions were basically placed under the influence of a general or a bureaucrat. And this general was supervised by the central government, but they were responsible for protecting the peasants of that region. And to protect the peasants of that region, they recruited their officers and their military soldiers from usually peasants in their area. And so that's how they kind of protected the Byzantine Empire. And to ensure that these generals stayed under the control of the emperor, they used the central army, they used the elaborate bureaucracy, and the emperor even had a network of spies to ensure that they were doing what they were supposed to. So when we compare the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe, there's going to be growing tensions between these competing cultures. And we talked about this a little bit already, but the East was more of a Greek-speaking and Greek culture. The emperors had a lot of power, and the church was kind of underneath the state. Meanwhile, Rome, Latin was the chief language, and there the Pope could kind of do what he wanted to. The Pope was autonomous from the kings of Western Europe. And so we're going to see these growing differences and these growing divisions between the East and West. And these are going to come to a head with the Great Schism, which we'll look at shortly. The Byzantine economy. The backbone of the entire Byzantine economy was a large class of free peasants. And it's from these peasants that most of your army recruits came from. They provided most of the agriculture and other goods. They also provided most of the tax revenues. And for the early part of the Byzantine Empire, you had this large class of free peasants. Well, towards the later part of the empire, this large class of free peasants is going to begin to decline. And as the number of free peasants declined, well, that meant your tax revenues declined. It also meant your production declined. It also meant that your military recruits shrank as well. And so it's going to cause many economic issues in the later part of the Byzantine Empire. As far as trade goes, another similarity between the Byzantine Empire and China is the production of high quality silk. Now, when we think of silk production, typically throughout all of world history, you think of China. Well, the Byzantines are going to learn to produce their own high quality silk. And there's a story that silk production was smuggled from China by two monks who traveled to China, and they hollowed out the middle of their walking sticks, and they filled their walking sticks with silkworms from China and brought them back to the Byzantine Empire. And that's how silk production spread. While the story is probably not true, silk production did gradually spread from China to the Byzantine Empire, and it's going to become one of their key export items. Also, trade was vital to the Byzantine Empire, and their location put them in a great spot for that trade. They were right at the crossroads, similar to the Islamic world, the crossroads of Asia and Europe and Africa. They had access to the Mediterranean as well. And banks and early commercial partnerships are going to help support this trade as well. Unlike Western Europe, the Byzantine Empire was also fairly urban. There were several large cities, but by far the largest was the capital. Constantinople was the heart of the Byzantine Empire. And here you had large palaces where your aristocrats lived. It was also similar to the old Roman Empire, filled with a wide variety of attractions. And so they had public baths and taverns and restaurants and theaters where you could go and entertain yourself. But by far the most popular of these entertainments was the chariot races.